Towson, plowing of various substances falling from the sky. This guy has left Baltimore. He was my old mentor at the News American, and of course from Mount St. Joe and Loyola, the college, not the high school. He was a Greyhound, not a Don. He's down in Atlanta, contributing to WNST.net, as well as to his role with the Bahamas Bowl as their communications director and various bracketology and college baseball stattery. He is our old pal, Chris Pica. Blog and Tackle is the way to follow him out on Twitter, and he's down at Flowery Branch where it is not precipitating. You know, winter came in March, and it came in like a lion, Chris Pica.
It did, and it certainly did down here in the Southeast. We got our share of cold weather, which we hadn't had in a while. So, we feel for those in the Northeast who have seen the wintry weather this time around.
All right, look, man, it's bracket time. You know, you are a very multifaceted sports guy. Like, you know as much about the NFL as you do baseball and college basketball and college baseball, and you stay up on all of these things. This is, I think, from a media standpoint, from a network standpoint, this is like the busiest weekend of the year. I mean, it really is kind of crazy, head on a swivel, and it's almost like other sports really don't want to compete with it this weekend, right?
Yeah, this is the NCAA's big weekend. I mean, obviously the Final Four is a huge weekend, but the first and second round is always sort of, because you go almost noon to midnight every day.
And it's nationwide, right? Everybody gets in on the act here. Everybody has their version of the Terps where they're interested in something. You know, even in UNC Wilmington. It's all over the place, all over the map. And I don't know how many states are represented in the tournament, but it's got to be 30, 35, right?
Yeah, it's pretty close there, I think. And you know, you're right. It's people in their offices doing the pools. There are students, non-student athletes, because you can't do that if you're a student athlete, but if you're a regular student at college, you're involved in those, and everybody has a good time, and you don't really have to know much, if at all, about college basketball to participate. You could just throw darts at a wall or pick them on colors or pick them on mascots, and sometimes those people even beat those that are some quote-unquote experts.
Hang on a minute. So do you remember the monkey coming in the studio back in 2002?
I do vaguely remember that, yes.
Yeah, I've posted pictures. The monkey beat me, pulling names out of a hat. This is true. It scared the hell out of me as well, but the monkey beat me. I'm the worst, and here's the worst part about it, and I've talked about this all week, and anybody that's familiar with my program and have been listening for any number of years around this time of the year, I have traditionally, and maybe it was from like the 90s, I just took Xavier to the Final Four almost every year because I figured one year they were going to be that mid-major that broke through. Now they're not even a mid-major anymore. Maryland actually draws them this time out. I got my link with Bino Ranston and all that stuff, but Xavier has been what's turned my pool into a puddle every single year, so I just go with it. This is the one year I'm not selecting Xavier.
Well, and probably a good reason why. I mean, if Maryland can kind of get their ship righted a little bit after the tail end of the regular season, I don't see a reason why they won't advance in the first round against them.
I love when you say get your ship righted on AM radio. I love
anymore.
That. Yeah, get your ship righted.
They're not to make true mid-majors anymore. And in that group, and you think about it, Xavier was that sort of team that everybody latched onto. Then remember when Gonzaga was this sort of little school mid-major, not a lot of people knew about Gonzaga.
I remember with Butler. Nobody knew about Butler either, and then things happened,
That's right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and now Gonzaga is almost as well known as the Blue Bloods in the tournament, Duke and Kentucky and North Carolina, and Gonzaga's one of the favorites. I mean, so that's how quickly it can turn in basketball. It's a lot tougher to do in football, but it's a lot easier to do with basketball if you just get a couple of years of good recruiting and the right coach in place.
Well, in the years where Maryland doesn't make the tournament, there's no argument, right? Whether they're a bubble team, and I mean, let's be honest, at the end of Gary and the beginning of Turgeon, they kind of stunk for a period of time, and making the tournament was something that they weren't doing at the end in the ACC very often at all. And we sort of went into years knowing it would be a long shot for them to make the tournament in a lot of years, which is one of the things that made the ACC weekend so interesting if they could ever navigate that. But now we're in a different era where they're making the tournament again, and I remember years where every year, if they were a 4 seed, you're pissed they weren't a 3. If they were an 8, you were upset they weren't a 6. If they went west, you wanted them to go east. This is one of those brackets where I don't know how any Maryland fan could complain given how poorly they played in the Big East, the Big Ten tournament, Big Ten tournament in D.C. last weekend. I thought that loss would cost them because it was a home loss. The place was crazy. They haven't been trending in the right direction. I thought that 6 seed was, that would mean they were a top 25 team, and I didn't feel like they were. And when they come out, not just a 6 seed, not just Orlando, which is a desirable place to go, but then seeing Xavier and the potential of one of these Florida teams, probably Florida State, and to get to the 16 and then have to go to San Jose and maybe deal with an Arizona, West Virginia, Notre Dame, a Gonzaga, they have a very, very desirable draw. If they're ever going to play Cinderella, if they're ever going to go on a little bit of a run, it's set up for them. Now, whether they can navigate that or not, I saw them play last weekend. I mean, I'm scratching my head like everyone else.
Well, I think the committee has to look at it a couple different ways. The committee looks at their entire body of work. You hear that phrase an awful lot, and you have to look at their entire season. Yes, Maryland played close to home in the Big Ten tournament, but it's still considered a neutral site as far as everything. They're not playing actually on their home floor, even though they had a lot of crowd there. It's not really considered a home game. You can't, when you're in the committee, you're looking at that as an away or a neutral site games in the tournament.
But it had to be a check against them to lose first and then to lose. Given the environment, I thought the committee liked them. For whatever reason, the committee likes Maryland.
Well, the committee may like Maryland, but you have to look at the Big Ten as a whole. I mean, I think that's where Maryland is helped by some of the teams that are in the Big Ten that sort of lift all boats in the RPI.
Well, look, Wisconsin's got to go play Villanova this weekend, right? If they survive Virginia. So, I looked at this. Michigan's got to go play Louisville next week, right? So, and they won the tournament last weekend, and Maryland, crapped out early. Purdue's going to have to see Kansas. Right, I don't know. I like where Maryland is. I mean, I like that bus. Now, how far that goes? I mean, hell, they could shoot 34% on Thursday night and be out of the tournament by 9 o'clock, right?
Right, and again, it's a series of 2-game tournaments. You can't, that's the way you have to really coach it. You're in a 14 tournament at a site, and you've got to win 2 games. And you win that tournament, you go to the next weekend. You're in another 14 tournament, you do it again. You try not to look at the totality of running 6. Because as we all know, teams may get knocked out of the way, and then you sit there. And the worst part about it is losing a game you thought you should have won, and then you watch the remainder of the bracket in your quarter of the bracket crumble in front of you.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? You're sitting there going, boy, if we'd only won this game, we might be sitting at the Final Four. And that's the worst thing that can happen.
Because things are going to happen here. Davids are going to beat Goliaths. I know this. I watch this tournament every year. I've seen my pool become a puddle, as I've pointed out. Maryland is one of those ultimate teams that if I didn't have a rooting interest in this, man, they're almost toxic at this point. I mean, but then Xavier doesn't have its best players either, right? And Xavier's only beaten DePaul over the last month. So, this is everybody I've talked to that is neutral on this, just people in other places, they're looking at this as one of those really interesting games on someone's bracket pool.
Yeah, and the only thing that's disappointing to me in a lot of ways is we're not. I mean, I know Mount St. Mary's is in the field, Maryland's in the field, but you just sort of you keep hoping that in my alma mater, Loyola, Towson,
UMBC,
become regular
right.
participants in the tournament, and they haven't really just been able to do that. In recent years, I mean, they've had sporadic shots at it, but not. You don't have the big weekend where maybe 4 teams out of the state of Maryland are playing in the game. It's it's not that way this year.
Well, you got to go beat the Bucknells or the UNC Wilmingtons or I mean, that's where we are now when you're taking all these also-rans in the ACC and the Big Ten. When you're getting 6 and 7 and 8 bids from conferences now, if you don't win your tournament, you're not going to get in. And worse than that, if you're a buzzsaw and you kick the snot out of everybody and you're 85% in your own conference and you trip up in the semifinals, on some cold night in upstate New York, you don't get to go dancing either. So, I mean, it's double treachery for all the small schools, right?
It is, and I was at the Conference USA tournament working there in Middle Tennessee, who's going to be the team that beat Michigan State last year. They've got really good athletes. They've got a tough draw in the first round, but they were a 12 seed. And you talk to their people prior to the championship game, they thought if they made the semifinals of their conference tournament, they were going to get in as an at-large regardless of what happened. They win the tournament, and they're still a 12 seed. So maybe, now they're probably thinking, boy, we're glad we ran the table here, because the low majors or the mid majors have had a harder time in this tournament breaking into the field. It's been so many coming out of the major conferences, and Conference USA has been a one bid league here the last few years. But if you're looking for a team that's got athletes who can shoot the ball, and I think can really make trouble for somebody, you wouldn't do badly taking a look at Middle Tennessee in your poll.
He is Chris Pica. He is Blog and Tackle out on Twitter, and our longtime WNST contributor here, as well as a Mount St. Joe grad and a Loyola Greyhound as well, down there in Flowery Branch. And, of course, longtime employee with the Saints as well as the Atlanta Falcons. Free agency, Chris. We haven't gotten together since the beginning of this thing. We got together 2 weeks ago and talked about how much money would be out there and who would be floating around. And, a lot of times the tectonic plates shift in that first 72 hours, and there certainly was a lot of activity. I don't know that anybody's really won any of the battles. I mean, I think the Patriots have improved themselves. We all know the Browns had a lot of money. I look at what the Bengals have lost. I mean, but I see all of this as very, incremental losses, nothing that somebody fell off the side of a ledge. And meanwhile, the quarterback thing is still very much up in the air. I don't think anybody thinks they're getting rich on draft day and drafting the next Dak Prescott in the fourth round, or even the next Carson Wentz in the first round, quite frankly. It feels like the quarterback thing, all these teams that had quarterback problems 8-10 weeks ago when the season ended still have them.
Yeah, it's been a lot of, you've seen some major players move around, but not a lot. It's been a lot of the mid-level guys that, they're looking for a better payday, maybe a better opportunity. You've had a lot of pieces move around. We've had some retirements, DeMarcus Ware. It's been that usual offseason, but, at this point, they don't give you a Super Bowl trophy for what you do in free agency. It's a nice part of the puzzle, which teams like the Cowboys have mastered here in the last few years, and getting the complementary pieces. And I'm sure that's what the Ravens are trying to do with signing Danny Woodhead and the others that they brought in. And I'm sure that Ozzie and them are not done trying to do something here in free agency as they prepare for the draft. But it's all about gaining depth, complementary pieces, and maybe getting somebody that somebody else in your division wanted, and you steal someone from somebody else.
Chris Pica joining us here, a little NFL. Okay, so from the Ravens' perspective, I like the fact that they've kept Brandon Williams because I like Brandon Williams, and, cap numbers aside, but this is where we always get a little crazy when we start cutting guys off the edge of the roster because of money. We lived through Todd Heap and Haloti Ngata and dealing off, and Anquan Bolden, and watching all the mid-level, the Art Joneses and the Paul Krugers run out the door. This is the first time in a while that the Ravens have stepped up and said, yeah, we're going to keep this guy around for a second deal, and we're willing to pay the most in the marketplace to do it. And they got some loyalty and buy-in from him. He was very emotional. I know Brandon pretty well, like him a lot, and he's one of those guys you want in your building, you want on your football team. So for that, great, but as Lucas pointed out right away, well, they were 8-8 with him last year. Now how are they going to get better? It feels like when you keep your own guys at top dollar, it doesn't feel like a high-five moment. It feels more like a whoosh moment, right?
Yeah, because you obviously want to keep them because they think they're talented, and they're a building block to the entire puzzle, and you don't want to see some of those guys go away and go to other teams where they could hurt you. Well,
you've also invested in them over the, you've built something in the hopes you can't build by letting guys go out the door, right? Your guys have to set the tone. It's tough to watch those guys walk away, and the Ravens have had to watch a lot of guys walk away that they would have preferred to have kept, for sure.
Right, or looked at them and said, we're only going to be able to offer this much. You go out and see what kind of deal you can get. If you can get a better deal than what we're offering, more power to you. We'll congratulate you, pat you on the back, and thank you for your contributions, and we'll move on. If you go out there and the deals aren't what we think we know where the numbers are going to be, and you're going to come back to us. No hard feelings for looking. We're glad to have you back in the building, and I think that's the way the Ravens have played it in recent years under Ozzie. They've right player, right price. We hear this till he's blue in the face, and they've but certainly they've got priorities on the board of players like Brandon that they've said we've got to keep these guys here. And there's certain guys, for whatever reason, they're building blocks. They're solid players. They're players that can help us down the line. we need to keep these guys in the building. We don't want to keep churning the roster that much. We need some folks that are, have some continuity here for the team while we're trying to figure out the complementary pieces and the draft picks. And so
they would have loved to have kept Kyle Juszczyk, Chris, but then the money got out of hand, right? I mean, and
right.
you always know the money got out of hand for Kelechi Assembly last year. They didn't want to let him go. They didn't have that kind of money last year. Now, with the new cap bumps and stuff, they have the money to say, do we want to keep Brandon Williams at that price? Clearly, he was the chosen one, right? I mean, we've been sitting around here a long time watching this and watching guys go out the side door. I find it's sort of like with the Orioles. I mean, the old man wanted Chris Davis. A year later, I don't know why. I don't know why then. I'm not going to criticize it on a spending money part, but it is interesting to know where the loyalties lie when you're going to go all in on a guy.
Yeah, and I think that's part of, we talked about those off-season meetings the last time we spoke, and you may have your list of A players that you go, we're going to try to keep these guys no matter what the price is, unless the price becomes so exorbitant that we just can't be in the, we can't be in the poker game anymore. Then you have B-level guys that you'd like to keep. You tell them what the offer is going to be and say, hey, if you find better, more power to you. And then there's C-level players that they look and go, well, it'd be kind of nice to have you back, but more than likely we know you're going to leave, and we're not necessarily going to give you an offer to go against it. We'll wait and see what happens. If you come back, it's going to be at our price, not at yours. And so this is the way that this kind of plays out. I'm sure all 32 teams do it about the same way. And sometimes you decide you're going to move on from players because you need to for whatever reason. And the Patriots have been very good at that. They haven't been sentimental about players. And sometimes that's where you get into trouble. We start getting sentimental about guys and how much they can help you or not help you in the future based on past results. And the Ravens, for the most part, have been pretty good about keeping players. The guys who have stayed have been the guys that have really, really contributed. Players have gone out the door. Some have done very well for themselves after the fact. You shake your head and, boy, you wish you had them when they were still doing that. But there have been a lot more players in recent years for the Ravens who have moved on who haven't had the type of success personally or team-wise than what they had in Baltimore.
Well, there's been a 20-year history of that. Very few guys have gone out the side door. James Harrison would be an example. There haven't been many that – and Harrison didn't make his money here, right? I mean, the guys that made a name here that went elsewhere, I mean, the road is littered with guys who – share their best moments in purple. There are very few guys that had good moments in purple and great moments elsewhere.
Right. I think, you look at Torrey Smith, and, he was a guy who was available, and, he had good years in San Francisco, but he certainly didn't have the years there that he had in Baltimore. And so you look at it and go, boy, the Ravens did the right thing here because maybe he wouldn't have been that big a piece of the puzzle for the years he was gone. But there are a lot of people who would like to have had him back in the building, and he could be a complimentary piece, but it wasn't at the price that the Ravens were willing to pay for him at this point.
Well, and that being said, looking at the Ravens on the outside or the inside, there's still a lot of holes here. And as Ozzie said, we don't have to play right now, but they're going to have to pick at the end of April. And picking winners based on where the roster is now, there are possibilities here, especially on the defensive side in this draft, that are going to define the organization over the next 5 years. The next 5 years, it has to be better than the last 5 years with the Matt Elams and the Terrence Brookses and the number of misses that they've had so far.
Well, I don't think that's, and I'm sure that's something that they talk about constantly. Scouts are continually graded at the end of the draft. Where did you grade a guy, and where did they fall in the draft? Are we grading guys correctly to where they are? Are we doing good jobs as scouts? Are we getting the right information? Are we taking guys for the right reasons? And you go through that constant process. And I've seen enough scouts go out the door in New Orleans, in Atlanta, younger scouts, in some cases older scouts, because where their evaluation of certain players wasn't where they wound up on the board. And you're going, okay, so what didn't you see here? And so you constantly have to challenge yourself in the building to make sure that you're seeing guys the right way, that everybody's seeing the tape, that you're trying to find those diamonds in the rough, in the second and third day, but you've got to hit. You're right. They've got to hit more than they miss now because they've had some situations where, some guys haven't panned out, where a team like Dallas has had a lot of hits here in the last 3 years. The Ravens haven't had so many. And so in order to keep up what they're doing in the tough division, now they've got to be like Dallas. They've got to hit a heck of a lot more than they miss.
He is Chris Pica. He is Blog and Tackle out on Twitter, as well as the communications director for all things Bahamas Bowl and Popeye. Send me some wings. I'd appreciate that, Chris, and maybe a little rice and beans as well. I hope things are well for you. I know you're looking forward to opening day and the Orioles and all that. We'll get to Chris Tillman, and we'll break that down a little later on. In the meanwhile, go Terps, and we're shoveling out up here, dude. Be glad you live in Atlanta this week, you know?
Thank you, sir. I always appreciate it.
Have some fresh peaches for me when they're ripe down there as well. Chris Pica, Blog and Tackle out on Twitter. I am Nasty at WNST.net. Big reminder for you Caps fans. Head coach Barry Trotz will be with us on Monday night at Greenmount Station in Hampstead. Come on up, get some crab cakes. Say hello to the coach. Get swabbed for the bone marrow registry. And for There Goes My Hero. We're looking forward to talking some Caps and hopefully looking forward to some better hockey here over the weekend as we dig out. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.